It's great seeing you, man. It's been a long time.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've seen you.
Yes, it's been. The last time you were in studio with us was almost 2 years ago, believe it or not, right before Full Gear in Newark.
Yeah.
So it's been a while.
Well, that was a great show, and it's great to be back for Grand Slam.
Yep. I'll be going to Grand Slam. You're the only person that I come into the city for. One for this interview and then for Grand Slam next week. So it's very rare I leave my house in New Jersey to come into New York. And that's what I was actually talking to Adam before you came in, and the fact that with all the traveling you do, and he was talking about the time zones and all, like how does your body adjust to all this travel and the fact that you're always passionate, energetic whenever you're on the microphone?
Well, I think that, it's always the same time for the show. It's always on at 8 p.m. Eastern. So whether we're, out in the West Coast, we're still at a fixed time, so you can kind of keep your clock for the body tuned to the time of the show. And, whether it's 5 p.m. Start time in L.A. or an 8 p.m. start time here in New York, it just feels the same. Yeah. And then it changes a little bit going to Europe. It's a different clock when I'm in London for sure. But I like it. I love it. That's probably my favorite time. And it's great to be back here in New York where we've had some of our really greatest memories. And I'm very excited about what's happening in AEW right now and really excited about AEW Grand Slam coming up. And it's great to be back here in Sirius with you to talk about it.
Yeah, because you have All In, then you have All Out, and then now we have Grand Slam coming up in Queens. Then after that, the week after that, the 5th anniversary of Dynamite, and then you have AEW Wrestle Dream. So we're on the verge of, before we get into Grand Slam, because I have a lot of questions about Grand Slam, and it is an exciting time, 5 years of AEW Dynamite. Just talk about like where you started from, how it all started to where you are right now.
It's so exciting. It's coming up 2 weeks.
Yep.
AEW Dynamite's 5-year anniversary, and it's coming at the most exciting time in the history of the company. What's really cool is that we're able to present AEW Dynamite every week on TBS. We've been doing this now for 5 years, and there's so many exciting things to come in AEW. Right now, we are standing at the precipice of the biggest moments, the biggest time in AEW history, and that's what's really exciting about it all coming together for the 5-year anniversary. It's very fitting. It makes sense. And speaking of anniversaries, 3 years ago, the American Dragon, Bryan Danielson, came to AEW and changed the company forever and changed my life and changed a lot of people's lives. And I think it has been such a great person for AEW. And it's now 3 years anniversary since Bryan arrived.
Wow.
And in that time, I think he's had some of his greatest matches. He had what he said was his personal greatest moment in pro wrestling at Wembley Stadium. For me, it was one of my 2 personal greatest moments, and I've had them both this year as a wrestling promoter. Probably the 2 greatest moments of my life are standing on the platform with Bryan Danielson and his family, and standing on the platform with Sting at his retirement show. And to be able to do that at Revolution 2024 in Greensboro this year, and to also have Sting come up to me and say some of the things he said to me personally about his 3-year run in AEW from Revolution 21 to 24, and how he felt about it and me and AEW, and then to have a similar experience in some ways with Bryan Danielson, but a very different experience because it wasn't the end for Bryan Danielson. And I don't believe we've seen the last of Bryan Danielson. And he's the AEW World Champion. But what happened to him at All Out, I think, was very physically and emotionally draining. And I'm very excited about what's to come in New York because there's a lot of buzz coming now about Bryan Danielson, the AEW World Champion. And I remember at the first Grand Slam coming up here and doing all the media for Bryan Danielson versus Kenny Omega. And Kenny Omega was the world champion at the time, and that was one of the greatest moments in AEW history when the bell rang for 30 minutes of glory, Bryan Danielson versus Kenny Omega. That was another great moment for me personally. There was actually a film crew following me around, and you could see as they were doing entrance rehearsals early in the day at Grand Slam, there's an interaction on tape of Bryan and me joking around early in the day, and Brian and Kenny went out there and had a classic. And now something that has been building up, something I'm really excited about, that I've been dreaming about for so many years and never ever thought could be possible, is coming together. First of all, Bryan Danielson, the AEW World Champion. We saw him come here, wrestle the World Champion Kenny Omega, 30-minute draw at the first Grand Slam. We saw him wrestle Jon Moxley in the culmination of the Grand Slam World Championship tournament, and a great match in the main event of the second Grand Slam. And here we are at the fourth Grand Slam, the 3-year anniversary of Bryan Danielson arriving for his first match in AEW. And not only is Bryan Danielson the AEW World Champion, but something incredible happened along the way. Not only I talked about the match with Jon Moxley, but to have the betrayal, this new Jon Moxley, something that I think has developed into the most interesting issue in pro wrestling with Jon Moxley and Darby Allin, which is the most compelling thing that I've seen on wrestling television, and I watch everything right now. And then to have not only that, you know, what Darby did, the choice he made, you know, he's fearless, but he made a really bold choice, and it could pay off, but it's a big risk he's taking for the ultimate risk taker, Darby Allin. And the betrayal from Jon Moxley, who's been basically for 2.5 years of Bryan Danielson's time here, the central figure in Bryan Danielson's AEW career. And I think from the beginning, a really central figure in Bryan's career, because without the credibility of Jon Moxley and the success he had in AEW, there's no way Bryan Danielson would have come here as a free agent and taken the risk because he had a sure thing. He was one of the biggest stars in wrestling. And being able to do this for 3 years with Bryan, definitely one of the two greatest moments of my life. Like I said, they both happened this year. It was when Sting, what he said to me at his retirement, and then what happened with Bryan, and what happened to Bryan then 2 weeks later. You know, people have called it the difference between a dream and a nightmare, All In and All Out. I think they're the two best shows we've ever done, and I think we're doing the best things we've ever done right now, and I'm really excited to come here and talk more about it. But I wanted to tell you from the beginning that this year has been very rewarding. So when you ask me about time zones and all the things I do, to come back around to the original question, when you have things happening and a flow 6 months apart, when you have probably the two greatest moments, to have Sting and to have Ricky Steamboat and Ric Flair and all the great legends of wrestling involved in Greensboro, to set the gate record this year, to do the all-time gate record for Sting's retirement was very fitting, with Flair and Steamboat and all the great legends we had involved in the night for Sting. And it was a perfect send-off for him. And then to have Sting come out at Wembley Stadium to Metallica, just like he envisioned for the next time we saw him, and then to set the stage, to see the video, to have a great world champion in Swerve, who had this amazing summer and has built this incredible rivalry with Hangman Page that's really become one of the real cornerstones of AEW in the last few years. I think one of the best things we've done. And I think, this past year of Hangman Swerve, you could write a book on, and how great it's been. But to talk about Bryan Danielson for a moment and the 3-year anniversary, and like I said, to go from All In, which was one of the greatest moments of my life, to go to All Out, which was, I think, the juxtaposition, to say that for Bryan, I think All In was one of the great moments of his life, and then All Out probably one of the worst.
Yeah, like you said, a dream to a nightmare.
Yeah, I mean, for Star Wars people, it's New Hope and Empire Strikes Back, but they were very different things, but they were both amazing, and they go so well together. And All In and All Out stand as two of our greatest pay-per-views, and I'm very excited going into Wrestle Dream about what's happening in AEW, and the future of the AEW World Championship is yet to be determined. But at Grand Slam, the future of AEW is at stake, and so much is on the line, talking about what's happening with Jon Moxley and Darby Allin, and also one of my all-time favorite rivalries, and like I said, something that I always dreamed and I never thought would be possible. Bryan Danielson potentially, if he can get cleared, if Bryan will come and do this after what happened. We haven't heard from Bryan. Nobody's seen him. Nobody's talked to him since what happened at All Out. But if Bryan gets cleared, if he comes to Grand Slam, I booked the match, and it's a match the fans want to see. And I think Nigel's calling him out every day on social media. Nigel McGuinness, one of the great talkers, and this has been Nigel's agenda. This is Nigel's whole manifest from day one. He has made it a focus. He said, you can tell on commentary that his central focus, as much as Nigel loves calling Mariah May's matches, he hates Bryan Danielson. And what a great way to go into this great Grand Slam. So there's so much to talk about, but this has been my favorite year, and the way that I'm able to just keep fueled is I love everything I do. I've had other great moments in Wembley Stadium. Some of the other top moments would be Fulham promotion in Wembley Stadium and what has been happening. And this weekend that we had, just last month in London was really probably the greatest weekend. Fulham won our home opener.
Congrats.
And we had our friends and family there, and they're really doing great things. And to be able to see the squad and our coach, Marco Silva, and all the people I have a great relationship with, and then to have them come to Wembley Stadium and have all my friends and family come there. My dad there this year. He wasn't able to come last year, so he was there this year. And the cool thing was, with a lot of people don't know this, with the Taylor Swift concerts there, it created a unique opportunity for AEW. And also I innovated something, and there's so many times where people said AEW couldn't succeed and we would strike out and fail. And this was a great example. There was a lot of doubt that we'd be able to do the show this year because Taylor Swift's tour is the most profitable and powerful, successful thing in the world. And when Taylor Swift booked a series of shows at Wembley Stadium right before AEW All In, there was a lot of doubt that we could do the show at Wembley Stadium this year, and they had concerns that they might have to change our agreement. And they asked me about moving the show, and I said, we did the show on this weekend. It's a bank holiday. It's the Fulham home opener. I really want to do this, and I felt like it would be a really special thing for the company, and it was the anniversary of the first AEW All In London. And, I was determined to work with Taylor Swift in Wembley Stadium to make this happen. She had very elaborate staging, and there was very little changeover time. To put it in perspective, we had a couple weeks to set up last year, and we had a few days, from, Dynamite to Wembley to really get set up. And also, by putting Dynamite over there, we had all the boots on the ground because Taylor Swift did shows Monday and Tuesday. And we actually had people from AEW before the Cardiff Dynamite on Wednesday. A lot of people drove to Cardiff and went from the Taylor Swift concert on Tuesday because it's just a few hours drive from London to Cardiff. And so the way it was able to happen is people doubted we'd be able to tear everything down. And I said, let's recycle, let's make something different. Let's present the show differently. Let's use the staging. I've come out of that tunnel for 3 different sports now so many times. It feels the tunnel that we used last year for AEW All In, the center of the pitch at Wembley Stadium, the 50-yard line for the NFL games. I've been there so many times between Jaguars and Fulham over the years. Jaguars have played over a decade of games now at Wembley Stadium. And again, we play there against the Patriots this year, just coming up the weekend after WrestleDream. And I have to say, this year, I thought the show looked even better.
I said it on the show, and I'm not the only one that said it. A lot of people that I've spoken to said the same thing, Tony, that they thought that this year's show on TV, in person, just looked bigger and better. And actually, I thought the same thing. I thought it looked really good.
It was really cool to be able to go do 2 completely different things, but they were perfect. And there was some different things because Bryan Danielson was injured and wasn't able to be on the show last year. And this year, he had the ultimate moment.
Yeah.
It all paid off. All the times Bryan came so close to winning the title, he wasn't able to travel to be at the first All In, and then he moved up his rehab time to be on All Out to save the company. And that's the kind of person he is. And if I got hit by a bus, that's who I've told my dad over and over, and I've said to the fans and everybody, that's a person that'll take over everything.
And you look at what you just said about Bryan Danielson, what you said about Sting. How good does it feel for you as a lifelong wrestling fan that Sting chose AEW to be his final place where he wrestled, and Bryan Danielson saying, hey, this is my home, and this is going to be my home until I decide to retire. How good does that feel for you as a lifelong wrestling fan?
Well, it means a lot. It means a lot because Bryan Danielson is one of my heroes. Sting is one of my heroes, and to be able to present the Sting I grew up on and then present Sting with two of my favorite partners of Sting's and also his greatest rival and the person so instrumental in his career, Nature Boy Ric Flair, who's his greatest opponent and also teamed with Sting in big matches, but also Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, probably a person who has inspired me the most. Something that meant so much to me. Not a lot of people know this story, but time after time, whether it was, like I said, when Bryan Danielson really, I think, came back early at All Out and saved the company, Ricky Steamboat being there, but Ricky Steamboat then being there in Greensboro, I don't think a lot of people realize necessarily how much it meant to Sting to be able to assemble the group of people we assembled around him that night. And like I said, we set business records, which was really cool. It's one of the biggest AEW pay-per-views ever, along with AEW All In and All Out 21. These are like our top pay-per-views. And they also think about all the great wrestling in Greensboro. We set the ticket record and all of them to be there. And, I would keep it between us, but what Sting said to me, like I said, that and what we've been able to do with Bryan, what you asked about, those are probably the most meaningful moments of my career. So, to your question, I think it means the world to have Sting retire in AEW as the AEW World Tag Team Champion, along with Darby Allin, somebody that really I introduced Sting to, and then they ended up hitting it off, and it ended up being the perfect chemistry, the perfect friendship in and out of the pro wrestling ring in AEW and out of AEW. Sting and Darby Allin, inseparable. And what a life Darby Allin leads. And Darby Allin, and you talking about Bryan Danielson, what's to come with the AEW World Championship? Well, Darby Allin is somebody from the beginning of AEW that's been an important player from our first year, from the first series of Dynamites. And to have Darby Allin in this position now, coming into Grand Slam, challenging for a chance to wrestle for the AEW World Championship in his home state, probably two of the greatest wrestlers ever out of the great state of Washington, the world champion Bryan Danielson and Darby Allin, who's been the TNT champion.
He looks good in the pink robe, too.
You look good in the pink robe.
Thank you.
You guys look good together in that. And you don't maybe paint your face though, but Darby Allin is such a great star for AEW. But the person from the very first show who's been the most constant star and now is doing what I think is the most interesting thing in pro wrestling and the most captivating, important star in the world of wrestling, in my opinion, right now, maybe, is Jon Moxley. And Jon Moxley is coming out on TV every week and captivating the fans, captivating the audience, and I'm really excited for next week. But also talking about what Jon Moxley, like I said, it's been a different Jon Moxley since he came back. He's been talking about this match, and it's a match the fans want to see. Jon Moxley versus Darby Allin, two people that have taken very different journeys over the past 5 years, and Jon Moxley, probably the greatest world champion in pro wrestling history. When you could look at it, Jon Moxley's the only AEW, WWE, and IWGP world champion ever. He may be the only person that will ever do that. Eventually maybe somebody will do it again, but it's possible he'll be the only person ever to set that achievement. And I do think when you talk about Grand Slam, he's also one of the most important figures in the history of this show. So to have Mox versus Darby here in this setting, I just think it's so awesome and cool and very fitting for a company that then will be celebrating our 5-year anniversary to have two of the stars that are so important in AEW from the very beginning battling, and also two people that have very different motivations going into Wrestle Dream. It's kind of the ultimate bonus ball, the greatest bonus ball I could give the great fans of pro wrestling here in New York City, the bonus ball of will Bryan be able to come? Will Bryan show up?
Yeah, I mean, that's something I want to get into. But first, before I get into that, you mentioned the Nature Boy Ric Flair. In my opinion, my favorite match of all time, the greatest match of all time, is Terry Funk, Ric Flair, the I Quit match. That all led with the plastic bag. And I love the throwback that we saw from 35 years ago of Moxley using that bag on Bryan Danielson. And I was kind of shocked by so many people saying, I can't believe that this is on. I was like, this happened 35 years ago. And I thought it was fitting too. Who was on the call when that moment happened? Jim Ross. Who was on the call when the moment happened in AEW? It was Jim Ross. Was that intentional, that throwback?
I can't speak to what they were thinking.
Okay.
I think this is a crazy situation, but it's certainly what a great comparison to compare Terry Funk and Ric Flair, two of the all-time greats, to Jon Moxley and Bryan Danielson. And of our generation, those absolutely are two of the greatest world champions. And I would go to my grave saying that. And you just named two of the greatest world champions of my childhood. Absolutely, two of the greatest champions ever, Terry Funk and Ric Flair. And I'm really excited, about what's coming in AEW and what's to come. But I think, talking about multiple generations of the greatest wrestlers, to have this, like I said, the ultimate bonus ball coming this week in New York City. One of the rivalries that for me was a rivalry that for me was kind of my college rivalry, the peak of Bryan Danielson and Nigel McGuinness. And Nigel McGuinness, since he's arrived in AEW, has been calling for it. And he got to have a great moment at Wembley Stadium, too. It was almost perfect. He almost got that guaranteed world title shot. But, no matter who got that, I guess Jon Moxley would have crashed their plans. Because as we saw, he wasn't going to let Christian Cage cash that in either. Speaking of the great AEW stars and the great free agent signings and the important people, Christian Cage, somebody that's looming, one of our best stars ever, somebody that I think is doing the best work of his career today in AEW, and I would now say is just cementing his legacy. Speaking of the great champions, somebody who's been the TNT champion here in AEW, is a great star. He's been a World Trios champion in AEW, but he's also one of the great world champions in the history of wrestling, and I think Christian Cage is one of the best wrestlers in the world, and maybe the best wrestler in the world today. And certainly I think Christian Cage at any given time, you could say he's the MVP of AEW. But certainly comparing, like you said, Terry Funk and Ric Flair, that's a great comparison for anybody. And I think those are two of the greatest world champions. And certainly Bryan Danielson and Jon Moxley, I think, are two of the greatest world champions of the modern era. And then you have, I think, the greatest young wrestler today who's never won the world title, Darby Allin. He's been the world tag team champion, undefeated with Sting, maybe the greatest tag team ever. I think the greatest tag team ever in AEW, Sting and Darby Allin. And then you have the greatest TNT champion ever, but he's never been the world champion. It kind of reminds me when I was a kid of my favorite golfer I always loved Phil Mickelson, and until the 2004 Masters, he never won it. And he was the greatest. And he won all the tournaments. He was clearly the coolest and best guy. And but he would never win the tournament. And Darby Allin's come close to winning the world title a lot of times. And I love rooting for him. And he's won the Royal Rampage. He's kind of the king of the Royal Rampage when you think about it. We've had 3, and Darby Allin, he won the last 2, and the first one he won his ring, and Brody King won the other ring, and it came down to those 2, and one of the most famous finishes in AEW history in Detroit at the first Royal Rampage. But I do think it's a really compelling world championship picture when you think about that, and you have maybe the greatest world champion in the history of the sport versus the greatest wrestler never to win the title. And then they're fighting for the shot at Bryan Danielson at WrestleDream, and they both have such compelling reasons to want to wrestle Bryan, and we don't even know where Bryan is and if he's going to show up.
Well, that's the big question, and that brings me to my next question, and that's Nigel McGuinness and Bryan Danielson. Like you, I loved Ring of Honor, and Ring of Honor is something that really filled the void for me as a pro wrestling fan at that time. And to me, the greatest Ring of Honor feud of all time is Bryan Danielson and Nigel McGuinness. We're in September of 2024. They had their last match in September 15 years ago. That was the last time that Bryan Danielson and Nigel McGuinness was in the ring.
Barstool right now has got their college town poll. And as it stands right now, of all the college towns, I think Champaign, Illinois is in the running. It's in the finals. It might be named the best college. It's either number one or it's gonna finish Final Four matchup for the best college town. I think Champaign, Illinois is arguably the best college town. I went to school at the University of Illinois. It's a great place. I paid all my college expenses outside. My parents paid my tuition and my apartment and everything. They were very nice, but I had a college job, which was bartending. And my life outside of school would definitely be like bartending and wrestling, and I loved it. And it was really and then I got so hooked on ROH DVDs and Lucha Libre. Like you talked about filling the void there wasn't a company that did what WCW did necessarily on national television. So the stuff I was watching the most, like to kind of, like you said, fill the void.
WCW was gone. ECW was gone.
Yeah.
Ring of Honor came in at the perfect time.
You're right. And so I was watching a lot of Ring of Honor and also Lucha and then Noah, honestly. And that was the stuff I was really watching in college at night. And come home to watch that stuff. And like you said, there was kind of a void in wrestling, and I think ROH was a big part of it. Bryan Danielson, Nigel McGuinness, I ordered those DVDs, and I would show them to my friends and stuff. And, those matches, Samoa Joe versus Kenta Kobashi, that's really the stuff that
greatest Ring of Honor match of all time in the New Yorker Hotel, right? Just a couple of blocks away from here.
Yeah.
Yep. I was there that night.
Really?
So, yeah.
That's great. So I bought that in college, and I was showing that to my friends, and I would show them that along with like the lucha, because that was the cool stuff that was happening, in wrestling at the time after WCW closed down. And so, like you said, I think there was like kind of a void in that Bryan Danielson Nigel McGuinness rivalry. To me, it takes me back to when I was in school, and I had a great time in college, and Ring of Honor wrestling, Lucha, and Noah was the stuff I loved. And then, after that, I got more into New Japan when the Super Juniors, when Kenny Omega and Kota Ibushi, Prince Devitt, a lot of those names really got me very interested again in the New Japan junior heavyweight division. And then I got more interested in the heavyweight division with all the great things happening, and the rise of the great world champion in New Japan, and now the AEW Continental Champion Okada, who's been such a great presence. What they were doing got me so interested, and he's definitely one of the great stars in the history of New Japan Pro Wrestling. Very excited to have him here, and he's aligned with the World Tag Team Champions, who are possibly the greatest team of all time. They've been champions all over the world, and while I don't always see in the ring eye to eye with the Young Bucks, I do really respect their wrestling, and what a great match it just was on Dynamite, this trios match, and I think a great preview of what's to come with
Grand Slam.
The Elite versus the United Empire, and a lot of questions coming out of the main event, but the United Empire of Ospreay and Fletcher could rise again, and the Empire versus the Elite, the Young Bucks versus Fletcher and Ospreay, and talking about the great champions. The AEW International Champion, one of the greatest world champions in New Japan, and I think one of the greatest young wrestlers. Again, somebody who might be the best never to win the AEW World Title, and somebody who's the AEW International Champion and doing some of the best things in all the world of wrestling right now. Will Ospreay teaming with his longtime friend, whose partner has been out injured. These guys have been in a faction. They have a real life bond, and they've teamed a lot. This isn't not a new thing for Kyle Fletcher and Will Ospreay. They've teamed all over the world, and the United Empire is a great unit. And now we saw them pick up the win over the Young Bucks last night, and Will Ospreay's in really his time in AEW, I think, has been arguably one of our top stars, maybe somebody that could be a real cornerstone, in my opinion, for the future of AEW for a long time to come. The international champion Will Ospreay, will he be going into the 5-year anniversary show where, again, talking about his friends and rivals, he's going to be taking on one of his greatest rivals ever, Ricochet, at the 5-year anniversary. What a match for the 5-year anniversary.
So that brings me to my next question, because you have two dream matches, well, possibly two dream matches, with Nigel McGuinness and Bryan Danielson at Grand Slam, and then Ricochet and Will Ospreay. How tough is it a decision for you to like, you know what?
And we don't know. Nobody knows if Brian's going to come.
That's what I'm saying. For Bryan Danielson and Nigel McGuinness, possibly next week at Grand Slam, like, is that something like, or even Will Ospreay and Ricochet, which is going to be on the 5-year anniversary show. How hard of a decision for you is like, all right, let's have these matches now because these are important shows. Grand Slam's an important show. Our 5-year anniversary show is an important show. Or to build something that could bring more attention to those matches.
That's why I think it makes perfect sense with these big stages. We have the greatest roster ever. There's an unlimited supply of huge matches, but these are matches that have been building since the people arrived in AEW. Really, I think, obviously Ricochet hasn't been here very long. He arrived on our biggest stage, Wembley Stadium, in this awesome Casino Gauntlet match, which, as a side note, has been another thing. But I love ideas, and that's an idea that came to me in Jacksonville Daly's place when I was looking for a concept. And when you're up against the wall, looking, I came up with a Casino Gauntlet match and got Spike Piledrived on the same night. In Daly's place. By
the way, it looks like it's good to see your neck doing better,
yeah,
and you're
okay. Really complete 100%.
Okay,
thank you. And it's good to be back 100%. But what a year it's been, and that Casino Gauntlet match, what a concept it is, and it's really something very special. And you can have it on the biggest stage. And this year I've been able to have it in some places I really love, including Jacksonville Daly's place, the LA Forum, and Wembley Stadium. It's been great. I really, really love the concept of it. And also, it was great to debut a new star, Ricochet, who got a huge reaction at Wembley Stadium. And also from his arrival here, Ricochet, I think, has been somebody that fans have wanted to see in AEW. There had been a lot of anticipation. People even thought that one of my favorite young stars, who's been a great rising weekend warrior every Saturday, mostly on Collision. We could see him on TNT, but even coming to TBS, I think soon, one of my favorite young stars, Hologram. And people even thought Hologram might be Ricochet. And that was I had a completely different plan for my friend Hologram. I do think Ricochet is like such a great free agent signing. But the fact is, Will Ospreay's been talking about this for a long time. And as soon as he got here, Ricochet and Will Ospreay have been up against each other, talking, building this rivalry, and what a star Ricochet is to come into AEW. And the great thing is, with the history of Ring of Honor, which I acquired in my partnership with New Japan Pro Wrestling, we have access to all these great libraries. And what a history Will Ospreay and Ricochet have.
Absolutely. And even with Bryan Danielson and Nigel McGuinness, if that match cannot happen at Grand Slam, if we don't get that match at Grand Slam, this is a perfect opportunity to promote Ring of Honor as well, because the history between those two, and also the story, Tony, where let's look at where Bryan Danielson's career went after that feud was over and where Nigel McGuinness's career went after that. There's going to be some jealousy between those two. Obviously, he shows that on commentary. There's a chance to really tell like a really long-term big story.
Well, this is only, I think Bryan Danielson, this is an intersection in their careers, to your point. And Bryan Danielson, after a 3-year run in AEW, right at the 3-year anniversary, he's won the World Championship. He said that he was going to hang it up. Originally, Bryan and I agreed to a 3-year deal, and he was just going to walk away and then, hopefully, as it is, stay working with me in the office. And then 2 incredible things happened in a very short span. Bryan won the AEW World Championship, which changed everything when he went into the Owen Hart Foundation tournament and went for that shot to honor the legacy of the late, great Owen Hart and the company AEW and that partnership with Dr. Martha Hart that we have. I think Bryan was on a mission. He was fueled by, in part, a great speech from Double J Jeff Jarrett. Jeff Jarrett, somebody who's a huge part of AEW backstage and one of the great legends and minds, and somebody who's got what a great history. I mean, I could talk to Jeff and have spent countless hours talking to Jeff about the history of wrestling. Certainly I love being here in New York City, but the fact is I'm a big connoisseur of the Memphis pro wrestling myself. And what a great tradition they have there. But Jeff's wrestled all over the world. It would be, putting a label on Jeff to just talk about Memphis, but it's it's sort of like it's what a great chapter of his family's legacy and his career also. But yeah, Brian went on that run, and this has been this amazing thing. But then so quickly after that, it was a life-altering thing for everyone to have Jon Moxley turn on Brian after all these years, and in the fashion you described, befitting the worst betrayals and biggest rivalries in wrestling. And I do think that, there's still the future for Brian is to be written, but it's a different Jon Moxley. We've seen, like I said, since he came back, he's been talking about Darby Allin, that he wants to talk to Darby Allin, and clearly now wants Darby Allin at Grand Slam, and Jon seems to have a bigger plan, which is interesting. It's in some ways unsettling, and I do think Brian and Nigel, the time is now for Brian. We don't know. He needs every match. He has to live every moment like it's his last, and that's why, if you ask me, I do think Brian, knowing him, I always expect the best out of Brian. Nobody expected he'd step up at All Out last year, and be back early. He's time after time defied the odds. Nobody expected he'd get where he got 10 years ago in the wrestling business, and nobody expected that in 2024 he'd again be standing in a stadium in a completely different role in wrestling against a great world champion who's had a completely different kind of run for the company now. I think Swerve Strickland, I brought up the Owen Hart Foundation Invitational Tournament. I think if Brian and Hangman had gone the other way in the tournament final, what a great match that would have been. Obviously, you saw Hangman Page represented at Wembley Stadium, the rivalry represented, and Hangman Page vying in the Casino Gauntlet match as well, like with Nigel McGuinness, Ricochet, all these great names, and Christian Cage himself, and everyone that was involved, and all the great stories and moments that happened there. I do think there's story to be told for Bryan Danielson and Nigel McGuinness, and I'm excited to hear from Nigel this Saturday on Collision.
Yeah, I want to hear from him. And
every week on Collision, I think we've heard Nigel talk about this for, over a year. And for over a year since Nigel came in calling Collision, he's been asking for this, talking about this, and we're here every day. He's talking more and more about it. And nobody knows where Brian's head's at. If it wasn't, you'd have to think if it wasn't coming for Jon, Nigel would be somebody Brian would want to wrestle, but obviously after what happened with Jon and Claudio, nobody knows what to expect. I mean, what a moment in wrestling, talking about when Claudio struck Brian.
The look on his face of shock, and just after that, there's no doubt about it. We talked about the 5-year anniversary, and obviously Warner Brothers has been a great partner with AEW for these last 5 years. What's the future? That's the big question is that everyone's been asking about, like, the TV deal for the future for AEW.
Well, I didn't bring my sunglasses to the Sirius studio today, but the future is so bright. I need them. I should have asked Orange.
You have to wear shades.
Yes.
Okay.
The future is that bright. So we're in that good of a position right now. It's I know there's been a lot of reports and things. I have not done any of the leaking, with all due respect to the fine people at the Puck establishment and the Puck people. I didn't talk to them, but I know they've been reporting things that are very interesting. But there's a lot of reports and rumors, but I have not confirmed, and Warner Brothers has not confirmed anything officially. But it's an exciting time for AEW and Warner Brothers Discovery, who are also here in New York City, and the great people, David Zaslav, Bruce Campbell, all the great people at Warner Brothers Discovery have been so great to us. And I think we have a really exciting future there. I can say with 100% certainty, AEW and TBS and TNT are here to stay for a long time. And that means a lot to me because, we've been talking about all this wrestling history and AEW wrestling history. And a big part of AEW from the very beginning is bringing wrestling back to TNT and TBS. It started with 5 years ago, bringing Dynamite originally to TNT, and now it's every week on TBS, which is, I think, fitting because, it's over 50 years of pro wrestling on TBS with a hiatus of over 20 years. And it was in the early 1970s that pro wrestling over 50 years ago started on the Superstation when Ted Turner brought it all over America. It really changed cable, and it was one of the bedrocks of the Superstation TBS. And now to have AEW as a core show, a core sport, and, now we're 5 years into our run, started on TNT, and now with Collision and Rampage, every weekend we're bringing wrestling on Fridays and Saturdays. And it's so great bringing Saturdays back, that tradition to Turner.
Yeah, it's
as
what
well.
I grew up on. I got from Jersey. I grew up on Georgia Championship Wrestling on TBS. So
And I think maybe, some of the best commentary you're going to hear in wrestling, and a lot of the fans, they were, Pro Wrestling Illustrated Color Commentator of the Year, Nigel McGuinness, calling the matches with Tony Schiavone, who is really maybe the all-time great voice of Saturday Night Pro Wrestling. And what a great on the T-Nets, on the Turner networks, to have Tony Schiavone on TNT every weekend with Nigel McGuinness, and the juxtaposition of having TBS every Wednesday, TNT there, that team of Tony and Nigel on Saturdays. That's, in my opinion, I think it's there to stay, as long as Nigel's mouth doesn't get him in too much trouble this coming week in New York City. And I think Nigel's been talking about this match for a year. So is Brian going to be able to come? Can Brian get focused on this and show up in New York City this week is the big question. But I'm very excited. I'm excited to hear from Nigel every Saturday with Tony Schiavone. They're really just what a joy they are on commentary. And they have one of the great chemistries, and they have one of the great partnerships outside of the ring on commentary. Inside of the ring, Nigel, he plays his best music, in my opinion, with Bryan Danielson. And it's a tune he's been calling Bryan to play for over a year now. And the question is, will Bryan show up to play the music in New York City at Grand Slam this Wednesday night at Arthur Ashe Stadium?
The fragile countdown, as Nigel likes to say. But, yeah.
Will it be the final countdown?
Yes. So we'll find out. I'll be there. I'll be at Grand Slam. I'm looking forward to it. And Nigel McGuinness and Bryan Danielson, if that happens, it's rekindling one of the greatest rivalries of all time. Tony, thank you so much for the time. Congratulations on this new deal, and I'm glad that you're staying within that same family and bringing wrestling back on that family of networks, and appreciate the time as always. Thank you so much.
I'm very excited about the great future of AEW, and I'm also really excited. It was really nice to see you, Dave, and nice to be here at Sirius, and it's a great home for pro wrestling here, and thanks for having me on. And I've talked to you on the phone countless times, but it's always nicer to be in the studio, and it's just real pleasant to see everybody. Thanks for having me here today.
Don't worry, I'll call you on Thursday to tell you how I thought about the match. So
good.
Thanks, brother. I appreciate it, man.
I'll see you this Wednesday at Arthur Ashe Stadium.
I'll be there, man.
Great.
All right, thanks.
Thanks, Dave.